Everybody, welcome to today's workshop. Today we're going to cover something that is probably one of my favorite cheat codes that we have here. I call it the attraction cheat code, and this is a follow-up from the workshop that we did a couple weeks ago where we talked about how to get more calls than you've ever had, probably more calls than you can even handle. And this is really important in today's day and age where layoffs are coming around the corner. And trust me, in about 2 months, you're going to see a massive wave of layoffs. If whatever you think you've seen so far, it's going to get way worse. So you need to be able to figure out how to become invaluable to your boss, how to basically get off that layoff list, and how to get on the exempt list. So a couple weeks ago, again, we had talked about how to get your phone ringing so that you don't have to depend on prospecting and working off a database. Now today is a follow-up off that, so it builds off really beautifully off that. If you need a copy of that or want to watch that one again, I will go ahead and put a link to that in the description. You can also email me at matt@salescheatcode.com and I'll be happy to send that your way. But today we're going to talk about what to do when you have people on the phone or in person and how to actually quickly convert those into paying customers. Now, the traditional model kind of states that really what you want to do, what you have to do is overcome well, first of all, you have to prospect and call and call and call and knock on doors, and you can't network now, so that's not going to work. But at that point, you need to overcome objections, build rapport. You need layering. Some places even do layering. And some people even tell you that you need to do these steps, like dumb steps, like confirmation of comprehension, like, do I really understand? Do you really understand what I'm saying? And you treat people like a 3-year-old, which is really stupid. I mean, that's never going to work, and it's never going to work with me. So if I'm ever one of your prospects, please don't ever do that with me, because I'm not buying from you if you do that. But today we're going to talk about how to actually get more customers than you've ever had before, and to do it without selling. And today we're going to talk about what I call the attraction cheat code. Now, there's actually 16 different mental triggers, subconscious mental triggers that we use to actually get people to buy from you. And basically what a subconscious mental trigger is, if you're new to this concept, is it's basically things that prompt you subconsciously to take a particular action. So there's two sides of your brain. You have a logic side of brain where things have to kind of add up mentally, and then there's kind of what my friend Eric calls the lizard brain, where it's just you react instinctively and you do stuff just out of self-preservation and out of fear of trauma and crazy stuff like that, just kind of animal instincts. Now, we're not going to cover all 16 today because, well, there's a few reasons, but I mean, first of all, I'm not going through 16 points today. So we're going to cover my 5 favorite points on here, my favorite attraction cheat codes that I love using. We're going to talk about exactly how they're used and how I've used them. And a few of them actually tie together and you can use them together. So first one we're going to talk about is scarcity. Now, scarcity is probably the one that we've all heard if we've been in sales, but we've all been taught in a very shady way. We've all been taught that you need to instill scarcity, but realistically, how do you possibly instill scarcity when you have a product that if somebody decides to hang up on you, for example, and they just call you back 6 months later after blowing you off for half a year, how do you establish scarcity and be honest at the same time? Well, the answer is easy. It's just not something that you've ever been taught before. Now, the traditional way of scarcity is you think of like, your company has, let's say you're an insurance agent. Now, if somebody you have in front of you and you just say, hey, you need to buy today, I need to get an answer today, that doesn't really help a whole lot, and if somebody feels like you're foisting scarcity on them, you actually lose a little bit of, or a lot bit of the trust they have in you or your integrity. But the way that I looked at it is completely different. And again, all of these subconscious mental triggers we picked up from the community, which is that would be funny, an underground pickup group where we didn't learn how to pick up girls, but we learned how to get girls to pick us up, particularly the one girl in the place that we saw that we wanted to get to know more. And if you hear a dog whining in the background, that is my dog because he thinks it's time for dinner. So if you hear that, just understand there's a little golden retriever right down that way who is trying to be very patient. All right, so anyway, so the way I look at it is this. The way that I first did it, and do it 100% honestly and with integrity, is you want to look at it like you have this big concentric circle, right? You have this circle, and this is basically your company or your businesses is how they sell. So, for example, if you're an insurance agent and somebody can call up now or in 3 weeks or 2 years from now, and they can buy an insurance policy off you. I'm sure you're not going to turn them down. So you kind of accept everybody. So it's a big, big, big circle, right? It's not this. It's a big circle. Now, I can't sit here and establish scarcity with you when my company is telling me that. Well, yes, I can actually, and I'll show you what we did. So one of the things that I did, the first thing that I did, my job, and I wasn't planning on tying these two together, but it worked perfectly, was I really had to increase the value that I provided to the people that I was working with, to my potential customers. And so one of the things that I did is I looked at the entire life cycle of all the people they were going to talk to and interact with. And I needed to know who did their job well, who didn't do their job well, what could happen really well for them, and what are some roadblocks they might hit. So, and one of the things that I did was I made sure that I had somebody that I was a really tight, close contact in each department. So if I needed a favor, they would be able to help me out. So that's what I did. And so anyway, I'm talking to the people, and this was done in a college where we were doing online recruiting. So we'd have people who, really wanted to go to school, but they didn't really know where they were at. And so one of the things that I would do is I would say, listen, I'm the one person here that can basically bypass all the red tape that you're ever going to have. So if we were doing a transcript evaluation, because I wanted to figure out, okay, I have all these credits from particular colleges I went to, will they be applicable at the school? Well, if you're anybody else in the college, you just have to, put it on top of the pile and wait for somebody to get to it, and eventually they'll get to it, however long that period of time was. But if I had one of my people and I wanted it faster, I would just go to the head of the department, who was a close friend of mine, and we went to school together, different school, and they would fast track it for me. So I was the one person that could actually fast track this process. Same thing. If there's a financial aid question they have, I could put the request in, and they'll get to it when they get to it, or I could just bypass it. One, I knew how they did their job, so I could answer it for myself. But even if I couldn't, I would go to the head of the department, and they would get that answer for me. And nobody else had that ability to do all this stuff. And so one of the things that I would say is, listen, and this is 100% true. I'd say on a particular day where the school starts, I'm only choosing to work with X number of people. So if you want to work with me and have the ability to have all the connections where I can help you, bypass all the red tape, I basically have 1 or 2 or 3, whatever the number happened to be at the time, places available. And whenever that number hits 0, then, you can't work with me anymore because those spots are not open anymore. Now, you could work with the guy next to me by all means, and they very well might be able to take you, but they're not going to have the skill set and the connections that I have. So what I would say is I would make my own self scarce, because I was scarce. I was the only one person in the college who was able to do this for these incoming students. And so if you're going to sign up, you need to sign up, and you need to give me an answer, or you need to turn in what you need to turn in by this day and this time, period. It's a dead hard cutoff. Otherwise, you're either going to have to go to another school, or if you want to go to this school, you're going to have to work with somebody else. And it wasn't anything but being truthful. And there's a girl, Kalani, we're going to talk about her a little bit later, but there's a girl next to me who was terrible at her job. She didn't have a whole lot of students, and I would hand students to her that I didn't want to work with. Because it's no sense telling them they can't come here, just they can't come here and work with me at the same time. So I established this honest sense of scarcity, because you have this big thing of the school will accept these people, but I'm only going to accept these people, and they're going to come in on my terms. And if not, they can work with somebody else. But I had more than enough people that I was working with, so I really wasn't worried about I really wasn't worried about turning people down. And I know some people there are thinking, okay, well, yeah, well, you had more than enough people to work with, so you could afford to do that. I don't have that same luxury. Well, I started from zero like everybody else. I mean, nobody starts in a job with a customer base of paying customers. You start with zero. And so I got the same point, but what I did is I built my value up, established that differential between what I do and what everybody else does, and people responded. Plus, I started to use these attraction cheat codes that we're going through today. And again, people responded in kind, and I quickly built up a really awesome, high value, low maintenance customer base. So I can afford to be scarce at that point. But it's the same tools that I'm using once I'm scarce are the same ones that I used to build scarcity. So the chicken doesn't come before the egg. It's one giant chicken-egg combo on both sides. So with that being said, there's actually the next attraction cheat code actually ties in with scarcity, and it actually helps to amplify it. But we're going to talk about how it works together and then how they work on their own. And the next one is the reason why. Now, we talked about that a little bit in scarcity. Now, with the reason why, it basically, what it does is it connects your animal lizard brain, as my friend Eric says, and your logic brain, and connects them together and gets them to kind of shake hands together. And so with scarcity, I would tell them, this is why I only have 1 or 2 seats left in this particular start date. And it could be 3, it could be 1. They may be on a wait list. I mean, I don't know. It depends on whatever week it was or month it was. And I would tell them, listen, this is why I'm only accepting 4 or 5 people. I spend a lot of time. It's kind of a concierge service that I give to my students. And so I can't just willy-nilly just add people when I don't have room for them. It doesn't make sense. So the reason why I do this is because I work very closely with my students, and at the same time, I only want to pick students who are the top, most motivated, ready students who are committed to start on this path toward graduation. And so once you explain it to them, you have this natural sense of, this lizard brain where you can't figure it out, and maybe initially they're skeptical, but when you explain it to them, the logic side of their brain goes, oh, I get it. It makes sense. And so they put their skepticism aside. So the reason why is really important for that very reason. If you have a skeptical prospect, the reason why is the best attraction cheat code to use, because it gets them to convince themselves. And hold on one second. I got a dog literally whimpering. Let me let him out. All right, come on, buddy. All right, so I knew that was going to happen. So yeah, so if you have a skeptical prospect, this is the great one to do. And so what's paired with the reason why is a confident assertion or a controversial assertion. But it's something that gets somebody's attention. So if you tell them, listen, I literally only have 1 person that I'm taking for the rest of this month. That's it. I mean, that is a bold assertion that you're making. And if you say that and just leave it there, it doesn't mean much. And there's no meat on the bone. So there's no reason for them to really take it too seriously. But when you add the reason why in, it adds meat on the bone, and it really builds it up. And so they fully understand from a logical and conscious level that it makes sense. Well, why does he only have 1 left? Why can't he have 2 left? Well, because I preset I'm only working with this many people in a given month, because I don't want to overdo my workload, and I work very closely with them, and that's it. And I don't need to. I'm not looking to sell you. I mean, that's part of the underlying thing that I'm communicating, is that I don't need to sell you. Like, I'm only looking for 1. It could be you or the person that I talk to tomorrow. I mean, I don't know, but I only need 1. So I'm not trying to sell you on anything. This is where you're going to have to jump on this train if you want to get on the train. The train's not going to be stopping and waiting for you. And when you do that and you explain the reason why, and it makes sense, and they can tie off these loose ends inside of them, it eliminates the skepticism immediately. So it's an awesome attraction cheat code if you want to eliminate skepticism in the people you're talking to. Now, the third attraction cheat code is jealousy. This one is just awesome, because it basically is kind of the other side of the coin from scarcity. So they're very similar in some respects. Scarcity is when you're afraid to lose something and being left empty and hollow. It could be at a point where you could look foolish or become desperate or be in a position where you don't think you can be successful. It could be any number of things. So when you think of scarcity, you think of toilet paper, right? With toilet paper, it was like, oh my gosh, if I don't get toilet paper, I mean, I can't even imagine what life is like if you don't even have toilet paper or a way to get it. And so it gets people to panic, right? Oh my gosh, what happens if I don't have this? And it's always this question that you can never really answer. Jealousy, on the other hand, has to do with getting with wanting to get something that someone else has that you feel like you deserve. So it's not a necessity, but it's an ego validator. So, for example, back when the iPhone was created, before it was brought to market, people had flip phones or tract phones, but basically you could either call, text, and there were some applications. They weren't apps. There was no app store. It was nothing like that. And then the iPhone came out, and it was totally different. And when the smartest thing, one of the smartest things they ever did, was that they, on the mail application, the mail app, the Apple Mail app, the default signature when you sent an email, doesn't matter who your email domain is it said sent from my iPhone. And what happens is people immediately saw that and go, I know that the iPhone was released. Oh, I didn't know my friend had it. And then you think, well, I deserve it. He shouldn't be the only person, or she shouldn't be the only person to have it. I should get that too. And so people started buying the iPhone because it validated their ego, that I deserve the best. I deserve to have this. I want to have the coolest device. I want to have the most cutting edge thing out there that's cool that I can show off to people. And it was born out of this initial sense of jealousy. And so one of the ways that I use this, and you're thinking, well, how do you do that? That's great. You do that with an iPhone, but how do you do that in sales? Well, that one's easy. When I was working for the college, I would actually have people, and we talked about the transcript evaluation. So a lot of times when people came in, they didn't necessarily know how many credits. Let's say they earned 30 credits at another school. They didn't know how many would be acceptable and applicable toward their degree. So maybe none of them counted, maybe all 30 counted, but it made a difference because 30 credits is a year of college. And so I would basically get those submitted and get those fast-tracked for them. But I would talk to them about some of my other students, and we're going to hit, and this parallels to another attraction cheat code. This is going to be the fifth one that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I would talk to them about my other students, and I would say, yeah, basically you sound like you're in a similar position as my other student A or student B. And I would talk to them about it, and I'd say, yeah, one of the things that I'm really good at and I can show you how to do is whether or not these credits get transferred or not, I can show you how to fast track credits so you don't have to spend unnecessary time going to school. And so I have students of mine that will graduate in 2.5 years or 2 years, whereas if they worked with another advisor, they're probably going to be at school for 3.5 years, maybe 4 years. So, and the student A, and I'd actually mention their name and say, yeah, they're at a position where they're graduating a year earlier than the rest of their class because of some of the things that they're doing with me. And so at this point, it's not about me, but I'm establishing the sense of jealousy of like, well, I want that. Why are they the only person that should have that? I should have that too. I shouldn't have to spend unnecessary time going to school if I can graduate 2.5 years. And they get this sense of jealousy. But the only way to assuage the jealousy is to work with me. It's like the iPhone. The only way to assuage that sense of jealousy because somebody else had the iPhone first was to go out and buy an iPhone. Well, the solution to their jealousy is to work with me. Again, I'm pairing that with scarcity because the only way to get there is to work with me because there aren't any other people like me who have the connections and the skills and the knowledge to be able to get them to that point. So jealousy is huge. And anybody that has had a jealous boyfriend or a jealous girlfriend before understands the power of jealousy. It overrides everything. It will make you do things that you would never think you would ever do. But more than anything, it'll make you do those things right now. Jealousy and waiting, jealousy and patience are two polar opposites, and they do not interact whatsoever. It's a great, powerful cheat code. But establishing jealousy and kind of luring this possibility out for people is an amazing lure, and people definitely respond to it. Now, the fourth attraction cheat code is one that I call common enemy. And this one is great because it just completely makes people take whatever you say as gospel. So, for example, when I grew up, I was a Michigan fan. And so to this day, if I see somebody in a Michigan hat or shirt or whatever, or if I'm wearing one, people go blue. And immediately they're like, all right, me and this person have something common. We have shared interests. Maybe have shared experience. I didn't go to Michigan. But we immediately feel like there's a bond. But I'll give you an example. So I did go to the University of Miami, and last year I was at a tailgate. I was at a football game on the road, and I was at this tailgate, and there weren't a whole lot of Miami people there. I mean, it was a it was homecoming for the other team. I mean, there's going to be way more of the other team there. But I came across this group of Miami people tailgating, and as soon as I walked up, the guy waved me over, and he's like, hey, come on over, and had a full spread, a full bar, introduced me to his family, and boom. Now, he doesn't know me from Adam. I mean, he doesn't know anything about me whatsoever. But because I was wearing the same team's uniform, I wore a jersey from Miami, he immediately brought me over, and, it was like I was part of his family. And so I had my dad and my nephew and one of his friends with me, and they're like, that was pretty cool. I'm like, yeah. We all have, a commonality. And in this case, we all had a shared experience because we actually did go to school together. And so as important as it is to share a common experience, when you have that, you also share a common enemy. So we all absolutely hate Florida State, hate Ohio State. We all know that. We all know that we can start ripping on that anytime we want. We know we have an agreeable audience. And so it's kind of like that in politics too. So let's say, for example, and I'm not going to get too much politics, but I'm going to use it as an example. So let's say that you're a big supporter of President Trump, and you see somebody in a Make America Great Again hat. You're going to immediately, whether you say anything or not, immediately going to go, I have a ton of things in common with him. I can relate to him. We have the same belief systems. We have the same values. Whatever you think is going through your head, that's kind of how people look at it. And we have a common enemy. It's not so much that you like Donald Trump as a person necessarily. I mean, you may, but it's that, kind of the old phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the same thing applies. Let's say you hate President Trump. Then, if you see somebody with an FU Trump shirt on, or I don't even know if they have those, but immediately you're going to think, well, I really like that person. Me and that person share common interests, common values, and yes, we have a common enemy. And so this total stranger who you never knew before is automatically somebody that you vibe with because of you're sharing this common enemy. And so in sales, I use the same thing. And I use this in the community as well. In the community, if I saw a girl that I was interested in, I wouldn't just come up and start hitting on her. Like that's easy, too easy, too boring. I would actually come up from the side, maybe a little bit behind, and like whisper, and I'd point at some guy who absolutely was dressed in something really pathetic or whatever it was. And I would point up and I'd go, do you think his mom or his little sister dressed him? Or he's wearing those shoes or wearing that shirt or what have you. And the girl would always be like, oh no, it's definitely a mom. That's a mama's. And I'd go, yeah, it's a mama's boy, isn't it? She's like, yeah, absolutely. And I'd walk away because I'm explaining to her, not in words, but I'm just communicating. It's like, look, I know what bad fashion sense looks like. And that guy's a total tool. You don't want anything to do with him whatsoever. But what's communicated when I do that is that I share the same sense of style and fashion with her. And so I'm a higher value guy. And so in sales, it's the same thing. So I knew that they were going to be talking to other schools. And so I would, talk to them. I'm like, how many people have you talked to? Is it over 10 or under 10? And they're like, it's probably a little bit under 10 other schools. And I'd say, okay, well, listen. We're not doing anything today. I want you to talk to those schools, and then I want you to do some research on those schools. And then when we talk again, you can tell me what you found. And I'd say, okay, I want you to go to Google Maps, and I want you to tell me, look up the address of the school on their website and tell me what you find. Like, how big is the campus? Of course, they look it up, and in most cases, these schools are not like traditional schools, but they have an office building somewhere. And so they're like, yeah, I couldn't find the campus. It was really frustrating. The only thing I found was an office building. I'm like, okay, well, that's why. That's all they are. And I'd ask them, okay, well, the second thing that I would ask them before they came back is see if you can find a picture of their quad. And of course, most of the time they didn't have a quad, so they'd be like, well, I couldn't find one. I'm like, yeah, it's because they don't have one. Again, they're just a corporate university. And the third one, I'd say, well, give me one of their sports teams, and maybe if you could find one of the scores, that'd be great too. And I was like, well, they don't have any sports teams. And I'm like, well, I said, this is the thing you want to do when you're picking out a school. You want to pick one out that when you apply for a job and you put this on your resume, if you see that school whatever one you looked up, they're going to see that too, and they're going to go, oh, it's probably just a diploma mill. But I said, when you see a school that has a quad and a big campus and sports teams, then that's what the people, when you apply to a job, are going to see, and they're going to go, oh, that's a real liberal arts school, and they're going to take your degree, meaning more valuable than the guy who went to the other one. And so we share a common enemy. And I'm like, well, part of, is that's from just the competitive school standpoint. But even other people, I'm like, when you talk to them, keep in mind, pay attention to the level of anxiety they have. And one of the things you're going to find is there's going to be either they're very pushy or a very rich anxiety, because on that end they have a lot of really aggressive sales goals, and they're getting pushed by their boss, and they end up being really pushy and aggressive. And I said there's probably people here that are like that too, but I said realistically, I'm at a point where I don't do that. I only accept, for the most part, either referrals or people that are just literally the best candidate I could find. But I turn away more business than I can. Then I actually get offered. And so in this case, I'm kind of letting them in behind the scenes on how things happen, that when people are calling, somebody's calling, it's not that they're calling because they really want to help you or that you're the best fit for what they're doing, but they're calling you because they're being pushed for a sales goal. And so we share this common enemy because we all have been there, and we all have basically experienced it, where we feel like the person on the other end of the phone has a financial incentive to get over on us. And so when you do that, they immediately start to identify with you. Again, same thing with football teams. They assume the same set of values. They assume the same goals, the same mindset. We think the same, and they start to associate with you. And then when you give them advice on something, they're going to take it without even thinking about it. So this one allows you to kind of subtly guide them along a path. So it's not the main one that you're going to use. You're not just going to use this one only, but this is one that you use where you kind of want to subtly guide them along a path and allow them to observe your high value. Now, the final one's my favorite, and this one is storytelling. Now, the great thing about this one is absolutely used where you have somebody that's apprehensive, not the skeptical kind, but somebody who's totally on their defensive, and it bypasses all of the traditional sales processes. So when you use this effectively, there's no overcoming objections, there's no building rapport, there's no getting routine confirmations of comprehension, there's no layering. You literally are taking them through a process where you can get them to sign up with you, and you never have to do anything with them. And the really cool part of it is that it's completely stress-free. So you don't have to worry about it. You're not stressing where your next thing's coming from. You're not worrying if you're going through the sales process right. And God knows there's no role playing. Like this is the main way that you can bypass having to role play, because there's no reason to role play. So what I would do is I would actually talk to my students or the people that might have been my students, and I would tell them, I'd ask them questions and pick their brains on things. And when I realized that they had a commonality with one of my students, I would talk to them about it. I'd say, hey, yeah, you remind me of my student so-and-so. And I'd tell them everything about them. This is what they're going through. They have 2 kids. This is their name. These are their names. And this is what their day's like. These are what their worries. This is why they want to go back to school. This is what they're scared of. Boom, boom, boom. And at some point I'll just say, does that remind me of you? And I always got a yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let me tell them about them. Boom, boom, boom. And I tell them about how they started in school, what their worries are, what they're afraid of, how I help them. Yeah, their first class, they got an A. They were really excited. Their confidence level went through the roof. They made the dean's list the first semester, and they ended up graduating earlier than most of my other students. And so you end up telling them stories, and at the end of it, they're like, the thing is, it's like binge watching a TV show. They insert themselves into the story as the protagonist, as the main character, and they start to see themselves in there. So when you guide them to this positive ending that you're the person you're telling them a story about, then they start to see themselves succeeding as well. They visualize it out. And so more times than not, I would get to the end of the story and they're like, well, that's awesome. Well, when can I start? And I'm like, whoa. And I'm not going to just take them at that point. Like, they still have to be run through the ringer a little bit. And I would say, hey, we just met. It's our first date. I'm not taking you to meet my parents yet. Like, there's no way in the world. And so I have a few other questions. I just want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit for me and I'm going to be a good fit for you, and go through it. But they were chomping at the bit, waiting to go. But there was one time where I was midpoint in a sentence, maybe later in this, but I was in the middle of the storytelling, and they go, okay, that's great. I get it. I don't need to hear any more. Let's go. I'm ready to sign up. Let's go. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. The whole first date, meet your parents thing. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a one-off, right? And then it started happening over and over again, which is crazy. Like in mid-sentence, like mid-story, they're like stopping me and they're like, I'm ready to go. And it got to a point, and I couldn't believe this. This was like, I felt like Neo in the Matrix. It got to a point where I literally said to myself, I'm never going to ask them to buy. I'm never going to ask them to sign up. And it got to a point where I felt so confident of that. I worked really hard on fine-tuning all the stuff we're talking about. But when I started fine-tuning all these attraction cheat codes that we're talking about right now, I got to a point where I was so confident that I would actually tell them, listen, I'm never going to ask you to sign up. So if this is something that you want to do, you're going to basically have to interrupt me. And which is crazy. I had people literally that worked around me, looked around me, and are like, are you nuts? Are you crazy? Because everybody was just desperate for like they needed numbers, but they weren't necessarily all that great at their job. And I'm literally telling them, I'm never going to ask you to buy, never going to ask you to sign up. And they always did. The great ones did. The ones that I really wanted to work with did. And some others did that I didn't want to work with. And then what would happen was I would actually take them to Kalani, the girl next door that we talked about. And so I would say, okay, I need this, and this done by the time I would come into work the next morning. And I didn't tell them what time that was. And I said, if you turn it in later, great. You can still come to the school by all means, but you're going to have to work with Kalani. And Kalani and I were not friends. We never talked. She was no part of this. But if they turned it in after I got into work, then I handed it to Kalani, and Kalani would call them, and about 3 minutes later, they'd call me begging to try to get back in. And so, of course, I would raise my expectations. So instead of asking for a referral or two, I might ask for 3 referrals, or I would shorten the time period they need to get it in by. Or I'd do something where they basically had to be more like on point than most of my other even really good students. But storytelling is great because it bypasses it. There's no stress in selling because you're not selling. You're just telling them a story. You're giving them an opportunity to vibe with these other people that they can really kind of feel like they're kind of the same type of person. And you walk them through like the story, the arc of the story, and you can see the ups and downs, troubles they had, and things they were worried about, and how they successfully solved it and conquered it, and their outcome. And they realized, wow, I could actually do it. And so in the end, the really cool thing about storytelling is that you don't have to be salesy. You don't have to sell. You don't have to go through any of the machinations or machinations, whatever the word is, of sales. It takes all the stress away, and people immediately start to identify with you. But more they identify with the people that you work with, and then you by association. And there's no reason to give an objection. I mean, all you're doing is being yourself. You're totally at ease. You're stress-free. You seem like the great kind of person to work with, and you're telling them things about yourself. And we talked about that in the first workshop, but you're telling them things about yourself and about them by proxy that they've never told you before. And it really builds a ton of credibility. And they're like, wow, I finally found the right person. I mean, what are the odds that I'm going to talk to some random person that calls me and I'm going to have this kind of vibing and this person that's ticking off all my boxes and gets me? And I'm not even coming out and saying, hey, these are the things I worry about or stress about, but yet he's volunteering them out and walk me through how he solves and makes things easy for someone like me. So storytelling is just key. It's my favorite one to use. And if you ever find yourself being really anxious, storytelling is the perfect one to settle you down. In fact, at my desk, I was literally kicked back in the chair with my feet up on the desk. And we were not allowed to have our feet up on the desk. But do you really think that my boss was going to come over and tell me to change what I'm doing when I'm rocking it. I mean, I was routinely top 3 in the company, and persistence wise, meaning the number of people that had signed up with me and stayed with me, in perpetuity, I was number 1, and it wasn't even close. So you really think he's going to come over and tell me to get my feet off my desk? No, I'm the only person allowed to have my feet on my desk. If somebody else next to me does it, they're probably going to swat their feet off their desk or tell them to put them down. But it enabled me to have a stress-free life. I didn't make a whole lot of phone calls. I had more customers than I could even handle. In fact, I had to re-engineer my onboarding process. Remember I told you how I would only take X number of people a week? Well, in the beginning it was this number, and then I got it up to this number because I re-engineered the process, and I capped it at that because I just can't work with that many students. And yet everybody else was struggling to meet their goals. I was just struggling to find the right person. And I was turning down business. I was probably the only person in the company that was turning down business. And I was doing it because of these attraction cheat codes. They settle everything down. It's like taking an anxious dog and just petting it and petting it. And pretty soon that dog is just going to love you and trust you and be loyal to you and sit next to you and be the perfect little buddy, like my guy when he was sitting here. So with that being said, in a couple weeks we're going to do another workshop. And this one's going to talk about putting everything on autopilot. So the first step of the process is getting more calls than you can handle and how to generate those calls instead of having to prospect, because you never should have to prospect. From here, once you get them in a conversation with somebody, we covered today how to use the attraction cheat codes. Again, we covered 5 of them, but there's 16 of them that I use. And in the next one, we're going to talk about how to use it on autopilot, because right now, let's say that you made 10 calls. I was able to get, for every 10 calls, I got 5 callbacks. If I wanted 20 calls, I'd make, or 10 call, if I wanted 10 conversations, I would make 20 calls and get 10 callbacks. Then I'd have them and I'd convert them into the amount of sales that I want to have. But in the beginning, I had to kind of rewind the wheel, so to speak. But the next one, we're going to talk about how to put it and really automate it so you can scale your business. And this way you can actually get people calling you who you don't know who they are. They're not in your database. You don't have a name. You don't have an email. You have nothing. And yet these people are calling you out of the blue asking to sign up. This one is where your business scales, your numbers go through the roof. And really the goal is to avoid the layoff in the coming months, to become invaluable to your company and to be a revenue generator in a time when revenue is really down the toilet. So we're going to cover that in our next workshop. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, matt@salescheatcode.com. If you haven't already subscribed, you can go to the YouTube page, The Sales Cheat Code, and hit subscribe. We put a ton of new lessons there. Plus, I'm actually showing you how to make, I'm on pace for a 600% return in the stock market through this coronavirus thing. Has nothing to do with sales, but it's something that I'm really good at, and I want you to see what I'm doing. Again, I am not a registered investment advisor. I'm just showing you what I do. I'm not telling you what you should buy. I'm just showing you what I do. And I have a daily diary where I show every day successes, big wins, pullbacks, and where there's pullbacks, there's opportunities. On top of that, we have the Sales Cheat Code podcast. So whatever platform you watch your listen to your podcast on, we are on there as well. Just look for the Sales Cheat Code podcast and make sure to subscribe as well. Other than that, I will see you guys soon.